Good evening and welcome to this week's episode of Sunday Night Live. And it just seems like it was a week ago already. I hope everybody had an awesome day today. Today we have the pleasure of having Chuck Hartle and Kaylee Filio from Parts Edge. And tonight we're going to talk about parts. Why? Because we need to. It's the part of the dealership that is critical. It's like the heart. It's like the skeleton. It's an integral part of your dealership, yet most people in the store don't understand it. Unless, there's so much stuff that goes on behind that counter. It almost seems like a void to the people that aren't in the parts department. I'm not going to say it's easy, because it's not. It's very hard. I mean, I remember early days of parts with the microfiche. Remember the microfiche, Chuck?
Oh boy, sure.
We're old, right? So we remember that stuff.
And how about now, card inventory, Paul?
Card inventory. Oh my God, that's like writing repair orders before computers. I mean, we didn't know what that was. We had giant boxes of repair orders, and everything was manual. And now there's so much to it and so many restrictions and hoops that the OEM puts up, like, okay, jump through these now, while at the same time trying to employ people, trying to remain profitable, trying to not have your obsolescence go through the roof like fireworks. There's so much to it. So I figured who better to bring on than you guys at Parts Edge.
Hey, thanks for having us, Paul.
Yeah, thank you.
Why don't you introduce yourselves? And I understand there's a story behind this Chuck Hartle guy.
Yes, there is. So I love to tell the story. Hopefully I'm not having too many delays, but Parts Edge was actually founded about 20 years ago, and Chuck and Cliff Cope got together. Chuck was one of the largest Chrysler dealers in the country, and he was like, the DMS needs to do more for me. And he with Cliff, they created a system, and that's what Parts Edge is, really, to get the system to do what it needs to do for parts managers. So I love telling the story because Chuck's kind of famous, but it's a good story how it all came about.
Now, just to let everybody know, Kaylee's audio should be fine. She is having some internet buffering issues, so her lovely face will be
frozen
for a while, but hopefully you guys can hear the audio well, which is, that's the important part, to hear what's going on.
Yeah.
So, Chuck, there's got to be more to your story than that short synopsis there.
There has to be.
Well, Paul, when I started Parts Edge back in 1999 and broke away from the dealership, there was a couple of important things. I've been a fixed ops director for 3 years. And one thing I knew I wanted to do is I was a numbers cruncher and a parts geek. And I wanted to get back to parts. The other thing is when I started the Mopar Masters, it was a parts managers guild of approximately the top 100 Chrysler managers in the country. And I used to get up in front of my peers and I'd say, this is the way you need to manage an inventory and do it and get it done. And to be quite honest with you, Paul, I could walk, I could talk it, but I couldn't walk it. Like about 99% of the managers out there, I knew the right talk, but trying to get it all done wearing 100 fire hats a day was just impossible. And that's why we found this niche to move in and help parts managers get about 20 fire hats taken off their head to help them do things more efficiently. And Cliff, our business partner, Cliff, he was the computer guy that I said, I just need this group of parts, this commodity over in this stocking group or this source. And that's how we developed the program that we use now. And it's been quite successful. And I love what I do, Paul. I love crunching numbers. I love parts.
And the thing is, every dealership's different. So it's not just a one size fits all. We work with the individual parts manager and we make sure, what they have laid out is going to work, and we analyze everything. So it's been very successful.
Yep.
Now, speaking of parts managers, we have in our audience Andrew Rowan, otherwise known as Andy Parts. For years, I never knew what his last name was because I always thought it was Andy Parts. So he's here with us tonight. He's at I think you're at Toyota, right, Andy? Andy says, good evening, Paul. John Neeb, hello, everybody. And Robert Allen Carvel, handwritten repair orders. Yeah, that's a fun one. The only time you guys know handwritten repair orders is when a certain DMS does their updates, and then you go down for a day, day and a half. Then you break out the handwritten repair orders, and everybody's complaining because, of course, when the system comes back up, now all that which was written by hand has to then be manually input back into the system. Joy and fun.
Carpal tunnel.
We got Jeff Daniel in the house says critical component to CSI scores, parts in stock. A great parts process enhances fixed right first time. Review, order, and be prepared. Absolutely. And Micah Larkin says, hello all. Mike Larkin here from West Hartford, Connecticut. And Andy Rowan from Sandy Hook, Connecticut.
All right.
All right, so we got a few folks on tonight.
Awesome.
Good.
All right, so talk to us about the easiest thing in the world right now is hiring people, particularly in the parts department. No, I'm just kidding. It's probably going to be one of the hardest things to do.
Go ahead, Kaylee.
Well, I mean, we're experiencing that with everyone we talk to. It's just the hiring. There's lots of turnover. So it's just investing with those people and making sure that they're trained so that they stick with you. And so, I mean, that's the most important thing, really, I think, is making sure everyone's involved and staying trained so that they can be proactive with the department and feeling involved. So there's a lot of the hiring. I mean, I'll let Chuck chime in there.
Well, Paul, for 35 years, I've been doing it for 40, and up until the last couple of years, the most stable job in the parts in a dealership was the parts manager. They seem to go through general managers. They seem to go through service managers, controllers, but the one person, and there's still a few out there, but most of them are retiring now. You could count on the fact that, a parts manager was there 35, 40 years.
That's right.
We're seeing a large turnover of, assistants finally moving up, older managers retiring, or just going, we're done, especially through this COVID period.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I walked into so many stores. You're right. The parts manager was the person that had been there the longest, been through umpteen different 90-day wonder GMs and service managers. Everybody comes in with a brand new plan and they're all excited. And then 90 days later, what happened to that guy or that gal? They're gone. But parts, that's a whole nother story altogether. There's so much going on. And now I would say that with new parts managers coming, you're saying there's a lot of turnover right now in parts, and some of it's due to retirement. What are some of the other reasons?
Kaylee?
I think the lack of training, the support, to throw a parts manager into that position is such a huge deal. They're managing the largest asset in the dealership, and to throw them in without some proper training you're kind of setting them up for failure. So I think that's what we're kind of experiencing with parts managers.
If a store's got 300,000 or so tied up in inventory, I mean, it's got to take a while. That's not just something somebody walks into and knows it right off the bat, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's so many nuances.
Well, Paul, and plus we can think back hiring people into the parts department now. You and I talked about this prior to the show, but trying to find people to hire them, the dealership and specifically the parts department are not immune to the I'm not ready to work right now group. And so that's one of the things that I've really noticed talking with managers, trying to set up a conference call or whatnot. Right now, they care about one thing and one thing only: sell the part. Because that's how they make money. Those parts aren't on the shelf to gather dust. They're there to turn and make a gross. We'll worry about the organizing later. And so that's where we come in and help them at least keep that part of it going. But I would say right now, being a parts manager, between all the different programs, lack of trying to find people, and trying to maintain a good inventory mix is a real delicate balancing act.
You have to be almost a magician because you're expected to maintain certain stocking levels based on the different OEMs' requirements. And that's made difficult to a point by some of the stuff they expect you to buy, they don't even sell, right? Some of the chemicals and things like that.
Yeah.
You're expected to maintain a certain percentage of purchase, but how can you do that when they don't necessarily supply all that stuff?
You bet. In fact, the other thing that we see, which makes it even more difficult, is even in these stock replenishment programs, which I'm sure we'll probably cover at some point here, the manufacturers have so many back orders that, trying to get these parts with microprocessors and whatnot, the back order situation with some of these manufacturers is really bad right now.
Yeah.
And so they're struggling with that as well.
Mm-hmm.
That's right. I mean, there's the challenge of the job itself. And now we're probably into this, I don't know, what do you think? First or second quarter of 22, or do you have any projections?
I saw a 60-minute segment on the microprocessor, and it turns out that we only have one plant in Arizona, and Taiwan owns that market, and they can only make so many, and they're trying to catch up with everything. And they were projecting that it would probably be second quarter of 2022 before they really, got caught up, to be honest with you, Paul. So,
without getting all political, I find it kind of mind-boggling that now we're going to pump some money into developing our own plants, right? But why does it have to come to this point, right? Why have we been dependent upon outside sources for the chips that we should have been making? I mean, we've got a vibrant automobile business.
Boy,
right?
We do. And in fact, I saw that the way that, and in fact, I think it was specifically General Motors, and I drive a vehicle that does this where you and it's not a hybrid, but you come to a stop and all of a sudden the engine just goes dead, and then it starts back up again. Well, that uses a tiny microprocessor, and, GM said, to heck with those. We're just going to throw that off to the side so we can get these vehicles going. To heck with being able to stop at a stoplight. So even the manufacturers now are starting to prioritize what microprocessors are important to get the cars out for sale. Anyway, I thought that was really interesting.
Got a couple of comments here. Andy says, yes, sir, Toyota and Lexus parts most of my career. That guy, he knew every part number. And he knew whether or not he had it in stock half the time without even looking it up. Roger says, training should not be something you did. It should be something you do. Training is an ongoing, continual process that only those that aren't in it for the long haul don't see it that way.
Yeah.
It's so much harder today. I remember back in the day, I would, in my shops, I would be responsible for ordering all the parts. And I knew, and Chuck, you probably know so many part numbers in your head now, even decades later. The part numbers, the quick movers, not from a computer, but just because you're in the shop and you see this stuff go. Yeah, I mean, stabilizer links, KS 1014s and 1016s, coil springs, CC 627s or 507s.
Well,
pads, BP 1080Ms. I mean, come
on. And this dates me, of course, but from 1971 to 1990, I was working in a Chrysler, a Dodge store. The Dodge van never changed. So, it became really easy to memorize all of the parts on a 318, a 360, the fender, the grill, the headlight. And I still got all of those in my head. But then as we started to get into the 1990s and the early 2000s, manufacturers started changing models every 2 years. And all of a sudden, the part number proliferation just went poof, and so they changed so much now that it would be really hard unless you're working for like Toyota or Honda, someone that has a base number. Ford has a base number, that base number. But, when you get like to GM and Chrysler, the numbers are all over the board. And I'd say it's probably impossible to memorize them now, Paul. But
yeah, no, not now. Yeah. Back in the day, it was simple. I think there were less parts.
Yeah.
Steve Apicella says, I believe none of it works unless all of it works. Sales, service, and parts are all vital organs of a successful dealership. However, it's the orchestration of all three that hits the right notes with the customer or not. Man, Steve's always spot on the comments. Yeah, this guy doesn't just answer the question. He thinks through the question and has it laid out and framed out in a way that covers everything and makes total sense. Jeff Daniels says, training never ends, Roger.
Well, in a seminar we were watching last week, Paul, they were service managers were talking about, flat rate versus, variable rates and things like that. But one of the service managers said, and I absolutely loved it, and he was dead on. He said, technicians in your shop are ground zero.
Yeah.
And, dead on. You don't have the techs. You don't sell the parts because they're not putting them on. We're so intertwined to each other. That comment was spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's hand in hand. And, and everybody's looking for not just people for the parts department, but techs particularly. I went out to dinner the other night with a buddy of mine. He's the parts manager at a local Ford Mazda store. And the first thing he said is, I'm looking for techs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And depending on where you are, you don't always have you don't always have a school nearby that you can draw off of, because these are younger people that, they're somewhat limited in the distance they're going to be able to go. And they're also, and I didn't realize this, but they're also limited in some of the things or some of the functions they can perform based on their age.
I have heard that. Yeah.
Sure. Well,
now let's talk about manufacturers' ASR, automatic stock replenishment programs. Is that everybody's favorite?
It's our favorite. I mean, we're actually, to clarify, we are often compared. When I talk to parts managers, they think that we are an auto stock replenishment program, and we are not. So I love talking about it. Well, I mean, Chuck loves talking about it. So I'll let him lead with the growing of obsolescence with that and go from there.
Well, with the ASRs, which, you could call it RIM, which Ford and GM, Ford is using RIM too. Chrysler's Aero, then, Hyundai and Subaru and Mazda are all Parts I. Nissan just recently, their version of RIM is called ASR 2.0. Anyway, with these stock replenishment programs, one of the things, and the manufacturers have done a remarkable marketing job to the GMs and the dealers in convincing the dealer, we're going to give you more breadth in your inventory and we're going to guarantee everything. And the reality is they take control of the inventory and they cut back return allowance, and they only give you return allowance on the parts you buy that aren't guaranteed. And that turns out to be about 50% of the inventory, Paul. And so what really happens is dealerships, we've seen obsolescence grow in the last 5 years. We've seen it grow about 7% as at these ASRs because they have no avenue to get rid of them anymore. You know, the one gentleman that you had out there, Andy, who made the comment, he's Toyota and Lexus, they still have a really good return program, you know, and Honda does. But once you become an ASR, it's almost like the manufacturer said, if we didn't guarantee the part, you own it. We're not going to give you enough return allowance to get rid of it. And dealers are going to have to become much more educated on how to accrue money and increase their grosses to offset that so they can keep a healthy inventory. Because the more obsolescence you got, Paul, and this doesn't take a genius to figure it out, it's sitting on the shelf taking up valuable space on a part that you could turn and make money on. Right.
And the problem is, you know, you can't just sell it, right? It's obsolescence for a reason. And we're getting what? They're getting what? 25 to 50 cents on the dollar by the time you're done, and with fees and everything else, if
That's
you're
right.
lucky enough to sell them.
That's right. You know, and so it's become a whole different game now, you know, and dealers are having a hard time. How can 50% of my inventory, which is about the average across all the different programs, about 50% of the inventory is not guaranteed? You know, at bottom line, and it's really simple, the manufacturer guarantees what sells. They don't guarantee what doesn't sell, Paul.
But yet the dealer is expected to stock the parts. That doesn't, I mean, who came up with this brilliant idea to guarantee half the stuff and leave them stuck with the other half?
Well, and when you think about it, Paul, on top of this, the parts that are guaranteed, take like a GM dealership, they have to take 8.5 out of all 10 parts to remain compliant. Now, on top of this, once they put it on their shelf, if it doesn't sell, they have to keep it for 16 months. So guess who's bearing the holding cost on this part? In other words, we've seen the manufacturers to some degree have turned dealerships into mini warehouses to carry inventory. And a couple of manufacturers, you know, it's amazing. And I love this one term, Paul. It's GM managers came up with it about 10, 12 years ago when RIM first came out. And we see it across all the other platforms that are ASR. So not here to pick on GM. It's just the way ASRs work, is you'll see 35 to 40% of this guaranteed inventory. The GM managers call them one-hit wonders. You know, in other words, they have one demand, they sell one part, all of a sudden it comes up and they got to put 8.5 out of 10 on the shelf. 35 to 40%. And no parts manager on the planet would put that on their shelf based on one demand.
Yeah.
That's insane. And there's no way they can combat this.
You know, and you know, this is when you look at it, and any of you listening that might be an ASR, is go look at your percentage that you're guaranteeing that you're going in. They call them stocking policy approvals. And if you got to be 85%, be 86%. You know, what we run into is we see dealerships out there at 98, 99%. And really, now we're boiling back to the time it takes to look at these stocking policy decisions, is a lot of managers just go, well, it's guaranteed, who cares? And they hit the button. You're really in business for the factory at that particular point and overstocking your shelves with marginal sales, Paul.
So they've taken over your parts department, essentially.
Bingo.
They've come in with a mask.
I call it Ouija board statistics.
I mean, come on,
Oh
man.
man,
Oh, yeah.
I use that all the time, Chuck, and I sound like you when I talk to parts managers.
Yeah. Well, I'm the one listening to them. Okay,
I
I'm just
know.
reiterating. So
Yeah, I sound like
it's almost like legalized extortion, Paul. And it's a franchisee relationship, but ultimately, it's a matter of these ASR programs were designed for and meant specifically to help the manufacturer's supply chain, to control their velocity within the supply chain. And, if the dealers are a little bit of a benefactor, great. But in the name of that, now they don't take parts back, return allowance. I sum it up as one thing, Paul, as I've watched things dwindle here over the last several years. I sum it into two words only: warranty retail. The manufacturers, dealers are patting themselves on the back and going, yeah, hey, we got an uplift. We went from cost plus 40 to cost plus 80. This is great.
Was that revenge on the OEM's part?
Yeah, what I don't really think it's as much as revenge. As a manufacturer, there's this piece of pie, and they're going to make sure that they maintain their profitability like any company would. So they're cutting warranty labor time guides. They're getting rid of return allowance, incentives, and whatnot to make sure their piece of the pie stays the same. So while everybody looks like they're getting good grosses on warranty now, I try to educate the dealers, the general managers, and fixed ops directors as they're going on to warranty uplift. In fact, I did this in Connecticut for the Connecticut auto dealers, Paul. I had about 85 people in the room, and all but one of them had a warranty uplift. And I asked a simple question. I said, how many of you have it? And, almost literally the whole room raised their hand. I said, okay, what's the first thing you did? And of course, I get a jokester who goes, we counted the money. Yeah, okay. They implemented it, counted the money. I said, what's the second thing you did? Yeah, about 3/4 of the room kind of looked at me kind of strange. And I said, did you change your pay plan for your counter people and or parts manager if you're paying them off the gross? Because if you just went from cost plus 40 to cost plus 80, they just got an instant 40% raise on gross if you didn't make an adjustment. And a handful of them had done that. And then I really got the deer in the headlights look when I said, what's number 3? And they go, number 3. And I go, did you think maybe you should have taken about 10% of that increase and accrued it to throw away obsolete parts? And the damaging question at the end of this, Paul, where everybody went, wow, as I said, how many of you are in here listening to me today and you think your parts manager has gone to heck in a handbasket because obsolescence is out of control? Literally, the whole room raised their hands, and I went, they don't have any return allowance to get rid of it anymore, and you just got it warranty uplift. So that's the reality of it. You got to figure out ways to combat and come up with ways to get rid of obsolescence, because the old traditional, let's rely on return allowance or buy our way out of a problem, those days
Not
are
anymore.
long gone.
yeah.
But do you think, nobody can say with 100%, but do you think that those programs are a direct response to the fact that the OEM had to give up so much more of the pie?
Yes, absolutely. And on top of that, when you think about it, and it, to me, it's just smart business. And a manufacturer, I don't blame it at all for some of the things they're doing. They're trying to control their own supply chain. And having worked with one for a couple of years as a consultant and listening to some of these people talk, it's amazing, Paul, how we think of day supply in our dealership and our parts operation in days, 40 days supply, 50 days supply, whatnot. The manufacturers in their supply chain, they're looking at 6 months. And if they can get their supply chain from 6 months down to 5 months, it could be a couple of $100 million a year in savings, based on holding cost and velocity and whatnot, and those kind of improvements. So to see them moving this way, it's okay, but the dealers have to learn a new way of challenging this. And one of the things we see more than anything, Paul, working with the dealerships that we do day in and day out, is there are no reports on the DMS system. And there's no reports from the manufacturer.
Wait, what do you mean? What do you mean?
What I'm getting at is there's no specific report any parts manager could run that said, show me what's guaranteed, show me what's not guaranteed.
Oh, coincidence? I don't think so.
You're supposed to trust the manufacturer's website, so to speak, and there's only a handful of these manufacturers who actually identify the parts on the DMS, which makes it really hard for the DMS to go out and develop some really good comprehensive reports for a parts manager to really see what it's doing to his or her inventory, Paul.
Does such software exist, or does it need to be developed?
It needs to be developed. It does exist. It exists on our part. We typically treat the inventory at a dealership that's on an ASR. To us, there's two completely different inventories, what's guaranteed and what's not guaranteed. And you have to split those two and really focus on what's not guaranteed. And that's where it gets convoluted if you're not separating out the inventories into different stocking groups and stuff like that, Paul.
So on their own, they don't have such a reporting, but you're saying you have such reporting.
Yes, we specifically do that because we know how critical it is, and that's what we measure and respond to for the dealerships to show them, oh, here's your non-inventory growing or going down. Yeah. And, consulting with, okay, where do we make accruals? The obvious answer is let's increase the matrix. That doesn't work anymore. You really have to look at what's captive, what's fast moving maintenance, and you have to tweak them all accordingly. You can't get those captive parts to a point that a service advisor can't sell it because it's sale proof. It looks really nice to mark it up 60% above list, but you're never going to
sell it. What's the difference?
Yeah, and that's where customers start shopping you too. So that's some of the things that we look at is where can we increment. The last thing you want to do is go out and rob the existing gross to throw away obsolescence.
Right.
What you want to do is increase the gross a little bit through all the different areas, profit centers that you have. Obviously, warranty uplift did it, but maybe some other areas internally, customer pay, that level it off a little bit more to get that gross up so you can start to accrue some money to throw away that stuff.
Now, Jeff Daniel says, using a simple feature like reporting lost sales helps the OEM stocking levels. They are both tools that need to be used. Yeah.
Well, one of the problems with bringing that question to light is you'll see that most parts managers, at least on the big three, they won't post a lost sale anymore. They're scared to death to post a lost sale because the minute they post one lost sale, it shows up on their stocking policies the next day. So that's the thing you have to be really careful about with lost sales. I've seen people post a lost sale on a water pump, and the next day it comes up on their stocking policy.
So wow, so much has changed. It seems like just within the last 5 years.
Oh, tremendously, Paul. And, I was looking at this analysis in a 20 group, in an independent 20 group that one of our clients happened to get an analysis through the 20 group, and they put together this report, Paul, and it even was listed as 2004 was the last time that they changed or designed this inventory reporting mechanism. And, the measurements for inventory have changed tremendously, but yet all the old tools from, the 90s and the early 2000s are still being applied to measure inventory, and it's terrible.
Wow. It's so funny that, I don't know, 4 or 5 years ago, tweaking your matrix was just about a guaranteed profit center. You could increase your profit by 10% without so much as selling an additional part by going from 5 or 10 escalation points to unlimited or 76, right? And that's now old school. That sounds like it doesn't even apply anymore.
It doesn't, and one of the things, especially if you happen to be a fixed ops director or a parts manager listening out there, you really want to see if your matrix is effective. It's really simple. Go run your override report. The override report is where sales were overridden, and it's amazing, Paul. I've seen some dealerships that it's 30, 40 pages where you got salespeople managing the sale price instead of selling the product. Let me give you just a quick example. I see people who have, hey, if the cost is a penny to 99 cents, mark it up 600%. And so realistically, you take a plastic clip and all of a sudden this thing is $7 and a customer comes up and wants 10 of them. The counter person can't look that customer straight in the face and say, that's $70 for 10 plastic clips. They do an S equals and sell it for $1 or whatever, right? And when I talk to the parts managers and I say, hey, you got all these overrides, the parts managers go, yeah, well, I approve that. I agree. And I go, so do I. But let me ask you the question. Why do you have the matrix out there like that? It's like chaos, So
you have a dishwasher, but you're doing them by hand.
Yeah. So, to me, I call it the grocery store concept. You want to have an escalator or a matrix that's working right. Think of the grocery store. When you go there, they zap that thing across the barcode scanner and they don't stop and go, oh, this person won't pay this price. I need to override it, right? They zap it across. You trust it, except for, some produce or whatnot that they measure. You just go, okay, looks good. You look at, it looks okay. We don't do that in the dealership parts operation. The dealership parts operation, we've got this wave, and hey, I'm not asking you to trust me. I see it day in and day out. Go run your override report. If that thing is constant and a lot of S equals, you got a pricing issue you need to fix.
So even with the software, though, it sounds like just that component of it, to take into account all the one-hit wonders that are forced on you, it sounds like this is you need somebody dedicated to just running and working those reports, but yet at the same time, we can't get enough people to do that, to run the department, much less to do the extra stuff that they put on us.
Well, Paul, I won't turn this into a sales pitch, but that's exactly the niche we fill, okay? I couldn't really sum up control in a parts operation this day and age in, again, 2 words: special orders. Control your special orders. What's ordered gets sold. That you don't have over ordering by technicians. Lots of returns from body shops. And that if you're in the body shop business and wholesale, you're going to get returns. It's just a fact.
That just comes with the territory.
That's right. Either that or you're not in it. But making sure what's ordered gets out the door, Paul, is paramount to, because what happens is you get all this unfulfilled demand through special orders, customers not returning for warranty, technicians over ordering, whatnot. Maybe they don't have the proper tools, but it's a trickle down effect.
Sure.
These special order parts end up on your shelf. They would have never met demand. They didn't qualify. They end up, in the 7 to 12 month age area, what we call technical obsolescence. Yeah. Ultimately, they end up being obsolescence. So control your special orders up front is going to be the best way to minimize that trickle down effect to where it ends up being obsolescence.
Yeah, but to be honest, I mean, I've walked into so many stores where I just walk straight over, because that's a favorite part of my tour, to stop is that special order shelf. And you'd be shocked at the amount of times that you ask, do you know how much is on the shelf? And you get that deer in the headlights look. They don't know how much is on the shelf. You follow it up with, you know how much of it's scheduled? And you get that same look. They don't know how much is scheduled. And the shame of it is, there's software, the DMS and other software, that you can use to manage the process, so that you can better stay on top of getting those special order parts on that customer's car. Does the customer care? No. There's some issue that affects the gas pedal, right? That the customer's got to come in for to get this doohickey thing done to their car. They could care less. They don't feel anything when they're driving it. The last thing they want to do is tie up time to go in to get this recall done. And at the same time, the people that bought the part and they have the part sitting on the shelf aren't necessarily reaching out to that customer. Professional persistence, I like to call it. It's just this side of being a pain in the ass, but it's self-preservation, right? You have to do it. But a lot of them don't do it.
Yeah. And we did this study back in 2005, approximately, Paul. I use this term for stock. And these are parts, unfulfilled demand, that ended up on the shelf. And the manufacturer asked us, they said, you keep talking about this term for stock. What is it? And so, I've already pointed out, in the study, we found out technicians over ordering. That was number one. If you were big in wholesale, this could supersede that, especially in body shops. Returns from body shops. In fact, I believe it was in 2008, I saw a study by NADA. The average body shop returned 12% of everything they purchased from a dealership back to them. And when you think about that, Paul, they don't send the fender, the hood, and the grill, the stuff that you turn. They send back tape stripes, moldings, inner liners, things that you don't sell a lot of, and it becomes instant obsolescence.
How long do they hold that before they typically return? Are they timely with their returns, or are they like everybody else?
They're like everybody else, Paul. I went into a few body shops, back in the 90s, and their return pile was, it looked like a special order nightmare at a dealership. And then all of a sudden, every 30, 45 days, they load up the truck, or we would deliver something. They go, hey, we got a bunch of returns for you here. And they just expected 100%. And, if we charge them a restocking fee, there was words, then we found out, customers, parts get ordered by technicians under warranty, and it's non-critical, and the customer, a little nick in the door panel, they go, I don't want to leave my car there for a day or two, and they just kind of blow it off. But unbeknownst to the parts manager and that parts department, here's a $500 part that's non-returnable that, man, you want to do cartwheels and go get this customer in, because you're going to end up eating that part, and they didn't have to prepay it. Then if you're constantly having turnover with your parts advisors, there is a price to pay for training people to learn how to read catalogs, get the VIN, and do things. They make mistakes as they learn. And if you got a revolving door, that can create some issues. And then lastly, there's speculation, but one of the ones I like to bring up a lot now, we came up with 5 things back then in 2008. Now there's 6. Number 6, ASR programs.
Wow.
All of a sudden you get one demand and they want you to put it on your shelf.
Yeah.
That's ludicrous.
It is. I look at how things have changed in 10 years, Paul. It's amazing. But what's really funny, and we've all heard this 1,000 times, Paul, determined sanity, doing the same thing
Yes.
the same way, expecting a different result. Well, that's the tools we see on some of these systems and the reporting mechanisms. They're trying to use 2,000 measuring tools on a 2021 problem. It makes it really hard to try and break this down and disseminate it and make it work properly.
Is there a dollar number that is an average that a dealer could expect to lose? Is there such a statistic?
And I guessing and looking at specific ASR dealers right now, Paul, I'm going to tell you that out of, let's say 50%, let's say you got a $500,000 inventory, 250,000 of it isn't guaranteed. Easily, you're probably going to find somewhere around $40,000 to $50,000 is going to be obsolete, and you don't get 5% return allowance, 10% to get it back. You get 1.5% of your non-ASR purchases, to return that. And that's just a travesty. It's just a matter of point that if we guarantee it, hey, kumbaya, everything's great. But, this 50%, too bad, you own it, have a nice life.
Yeah, but even if they guarantee it, it sounds like there's so much that you really need to be on top of it. And if you're short-staffed all the time, you're having trouble getting somebody to work the counter. I mean, that's a lot of money.
Bingo.
Yeah.
A lot of money.
Lots.
And if this is truly some backhanded retaliation for the retail warranty, then it's like the cat chasing the tail, right? It makes it so that any dealer today that doesn't have that, they're shooting themselves in the foot, because that's their only chance to combat, which somebody else already started.
Exactly. And in fact, in so many cases, some of the things that we've talked about here, Paul, there's times that I feel like I'm Chicken Little. The sky is falling. And, then their obsolescence keeps growing and they go, why is this? And I said, well, I've been telling you this for the last 2 years. The sky really is falling.
Right.
And, I think a lot of times, as you mentioned up front, the parts department's kind of like this black hole, let's just hope it works. It really is time to come up with some new tools, to make sure that, the manufacturer is what they are. And
right.
There are ways to remain profitable that way. And that's what dealerships need to look at, is come up with effective ways to maintain a good and profitable inventory, Paul.
What about the dealerships that are really good and profitable? What would you have to say to those parts managers?
They were forward thinking. They already had accrual in place. We have some dealers, Paul, that they got 50,000 in obsolescence, and I call them up and go, okay, your non-guaranteed obsolescence is approaching 40%, which is really high, and you're at $50,000, and they go, well, we got $52,000 accrued, and at the end of the year we'll purge it and pull it. We're going to leave it there as long as we can. We got room for it, but they have a plan in place, and just before they do a physical or they get to a year end, then they do the purge. And, they are the successful ones who are thinking. Ford dealers have been much easier to convince, because for the last 6 years, Ford, you couldn't return a part over 60 days old. You owned it. You might be lucky enough to sell it through a parts broker or send it back to a Motorcraft distributor, but those OE parts, once it hits 60 days, you owned it, and you had to use their IMA, which is inventory management allowance that they got. And if you didn't use that to purge obsolescence, you were in trouble. And so as Ford dealers have been migrating to this RIM program, the one thing I tell them is continue to accrue IMA, because you're still going to find out 50% of your inventory in the guarantee.
Yeah.
That's just crazy. Jeff says, but tie in an online service, Revolution or Amazon or eBay, and track it wisely.
Excellent. You know, one of the things the manufacturers, a couple of them have done, Paul, and is they've taken away, they call it dealer purchase loyalty. And what that means is you have to remain like 90 to 95% compliant, depending on the manufacturer.
Yeah.
90 to 95% compliant, you have to buy it from the manufacturer. And so if you emergency purchase it, or you go out and buy obsolete parts from another dealer to bring it in at 50 cents on the dollar to help your gross, the minute you receipt it, it counts against your purchase loyalty. So that's kind of a loophole that they've tried to close so that dealers aren't swapping inventory through parts brokers. Very interesting, to look at that. But, it doesn't hurt to broadcast used Revolution parts, OE Connection, Dealer Mind, any of those, to at least try. Even if you can only get rid of a small percentage of it, that's better than nothing, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Right. Yeah, no, it's becoming more and more interesting. And I don't know that it's good for the dealer long term. I mean, there's a lot of dealerships that aren't here today that have changed hands.
Yeah.
Some of them multiple times. Mm-hmm. And they're just putting up more and more hoops to do that. I mean, in so many areas. I mean, look at what's going on with Cadillac, right? The world is investing billions of dollars in electric, yet 20% of Cadillac dealers are tapping out, saying, we're not investing the money, we're out.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And we've had a couple of dealers that made that decision, that they went, hey, the buyout's good enough. We didn't sell enough of them. We're not going to invest that kind of money for, the electric Cadillacs. Absolutely. And it's still, it just boils down to, if there's one other thing when you're measuring an inventory, and this is one of those old school measurements, Paul, that I really wanted to cover before we finished.
Yeah.
And it's turns on an inventory. We've all been schooled for years on true turns versus gross turns. And, the educational part is gross turns was just taking cost of sales and dividing it back into inventory. And, okay, now let's figure out true turns. That was, okay, we got to remove emergency purchases, special orders, and other purchases out of the whole receipt pie to figure out the true turns. And see, back in 1980, 1990, even 2000, that used to be important because you got return allowance and discounts buying on a stock order that help you keep your inventory straight. With these ASR programs, there's no difference between whether it's ASR guaranteed or not ASR guaranteed. You don't get any more return allowance. You don't get anything more. In other words, whether it's a customer order or a stock replenishment order, to the manufacturer, it's all the same, and there's no benefit. Every once in a while, they have what they call, QPO programs, quantity purchases, that they'll put out there for larger dealerships. But for the most part, that's it. And so looking at these true turns in an inventory, I had a dealer who called me up and said my true turns were 1.2. And he's a fairly large GM store. And so I said, well, the problem is we looked at it, and his ASRs, when they get forced back into the system, they were going through the customer order process. And so here's all his daily guaranteed orders are considered special orders. And once we stripped it all out and I just divided the actual, receipts into the sales, into the inventory value, his gross turns were 7.5. And so the days of true turn and gross turn are really gone. It should just be gross turns. The only thing out there that would be measurable that you want to pay attention to would be emergency purchases if you're picking up a lot of parts from other stores. And that's typically very nominal. It's usually customer orders, rue the day that would make your true turns and your gross turns be a little bit closer to each other. So I really try to coach everybody, listen, throw out the true turn and the gross turn calculation. Just get the inventory and the sales or the receipts and divide it out and figure out a realistic turn, AKA what I'd call gross turns under the old calculation, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had to come up with a very simplistic way to look at it, given the challenges that are thrown before the dealer body, is the answer up your customer pay? I mean, is that the only out that you have? And better manage as best you can the inventory that's coming in, keep a better eye on it? Is it those two things working in tandem? That's the whether or not you survive?
Sure. Internal rates, a couple of percent. You don't have to raise internal 20%. You can raise it 2%. Wholesale. Let's say, there's like this old tradition out there, Paul, that if a customer walks in with a resale number, you instantly give them a 20% discount. And if they're a body shop, you give them 25. In fact, I think the 25 is almost out the wall. It's 30 now with body shops. But the point being is nothing says you can't go into your wholesale customers and take a specific price code and change it from list minus 20 to list minus 19. Now, I've had a lot of people go, oh, if I do that, people are really going to complain. I go, okay. And
1%, Chuck?
Yeah, 1%.
They're going to complain about 1%.
Hey, if you're large in wholesale and you do a lot of mechanical work, that 1%, it could be, $3,000 a month. But one of the things I try to coach them through is, let's say the price code is 20. List minus 20 is price code 20. Yep. Go in and change that to list minus, 19. But at the same point, create a new price code 120 that's still list minus 20. No customers have this yet. And If you really get a good customer that you don't want to lose who complains about it, move them to the new price code. Don't go back and change it. And we found out in doing that, we get very few complaints from any of the customers. And most of the parts managers go, wow, this really worked well. And a couple of parts managers said when a customer would call, they'd say, listen, our costs have gone up and everything. And rather than hit you a restocking fee, we're just giving you 1% less. And they go, they're business people. They go, yeah, that makes sense. Okay.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, who can't understand that?
Yeah. So, that pricing to sit there and go, let's raise the matrix. Back in 2017, Paul, I did a webinar and I had 116 stores and they were all over the board. I mean, it was domestic, import, European, and I took all their customer pay and threw it into a big vat. And once everything was said and done, the average store only matrixed 25% of their overall customer pay RO sales, 25%. So when you think about that and you try to matrix that up, and that's a very small part of that profit center, it makes very little impact on the growth.
Right. Wow. We sure have come a long way and not necessarily forward.
Amen, Paul. Amen.
How do they survive?
It's getting tougher every day.
Yes.
And I'm just happy to be a part of it, Paul. I enjoy tinkering with this and looking at the stuff and, helping managers, discover new ways of trying to maintain profitability.
Well, it certainly does keep us busy, doesn't it?
Yes, sir. Absolutely.
And it makes for an interesting day because there's so much more to pay attention to these days that, you really got to be on top of your game because it's really easy to lose a lot of money without even realizing it.
Yeah.
I heard one dealer who she summarized her parts inventory as going and playing craps in Las Vegas. You can make it really quick and you can lose it twice as quick as making it. And that was a good way to put it. If take your eye off the ball, it just grows. And we're seeing that right now because of a lack of understanding and reporting on these ASRs, Paul.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I'm glad you guys have the software to help dealers out with this because, I'd hate to go on a journey without having the map to get me to the other side.
That's a good way to put it, Paul.
Yeah.
So listen, thank you very much. This has been educational, informative as usual. I appreciate you guys being on the show. The hour comes real quick.
Yes, it does.
What happens? It's 60 minutes. It's like 60 seconds sometimes. So thank you very, very much. Please put your contact info in the thread. You have to go through LinkedIn. You can't do it through here. Because I'm sure, especially given the state of things, people are going to have questions. And they're going to need a good way to get a hold of you. So thank you. Oh, Dan says great show. Love hearing Ford Rim comments. We'll pass those along to a couple of PMs.
Great.
Haley, thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to have you guys on the show.
Oh, hey, thank you, Paul. And thanks everybody for listening.
All right, we'll talk soon.
Hey, have a great weekend.
Next week. Oh, next week is 4th of July weekend. I had a guest lined up, but I'm thinking that with the 4th of July might not be the best time. The 4th of July is kind of like a Super Bowl Sunday. Probably not the best time to have a show. So we won't be having a show next week. We'll be back the following Sunday, and I've got a really interesting guest lined up. So we'll see you then. Have a successful week, and thanks for tuning in.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
Paul.
Thank you.